I just wanted to thank our partners, which are Greenbelt Alliance. Zoe is running the meeting, is from Greenbelt and is in this watershed. They're the ones. They have been working in this watershed for over 20 years and doing amazing things. So I wanted to start by doing an acknowledgement that we are on the land, the ancestral lands of the Lijan Ohlone. And we really appreciate having access to these beautiful lands. And this event represents an honoring and an honoring of respect and of appreciation for accessing the lands. And so we thank the Ohlone. And in fact, I'm very excited to say that Corinne's on our next live stream at the mouth of Strawberry Creek. I believe that's May 9th, how the Ohlone are using the creeks. I also wanted to let you know that for each live stream, we give a Shumi land tax to Segorte, which is a fee for utilizing the land to do these live shows to that. And some of it goes to the speakers and some of it goes to the program itself. Okay, I just want to show you, this is Sausal Creek. And we're way at the top, and we'll pull that map up after Mark gets going. But I just wanted you to see the entire watershed. We're way up at the headwaters, which means at the top of the creek. And the mouth of the creek is where the creek, the San Francisco Bay. So this is where we are. We're in Oakland, and we're in the upper watershed. Our first speaker is Mark Rauzon, who we've been super lucky to have a couple of times before. And he's going to be talking a little bit here about the Chabot Space and Science Center.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's great to be here. Privileged to be sharing this space with you. And it's truly right and just to thank the Ohlone and for the early work of taming the land that took place. But I just want to also acknowledge the land itself. The land has its own voice and its own way of moving, and it's also to begin geographically. We are on the ridge of the Oakland Ridge, which was created by a series of tech activities, which is thrust up. We're at approximately 1,300 feet along what is the West Ridge Trail of the East Bay Regional Park, Redwood Regional Park. And we are on a interface of several different properties. So the Redwood Regional Park surrounds us. Robert Regional Park is to the south, Redwood to the north, and Joaquin Miller Park, the City of Oakland Park. So we are really then again on the City of Oakland land. And here we are at the Chabot Space and Science Center. This is a relatively new addition since the year 2000, 86,000 square feet of science, learning, observatories, 2 incredible telescopes, park areas, broadcast, but 13-acre campus surrounding this 86,000 square foot. This has had an impact on the watershed by taking up space that prevents water from percolating into the ground. And we'll get to that later. But right away, I see this geodesic dome. I want to shout out to one of my mentors, Buckminster Fuller, who was one of the early advocates. And he didn't necessarily invent the geodesic dome, but he certainly made it popular. And he's a person, philosophy is that we are part of the universe, spaceship Earth, and this is our responsibility to keep things going. So this is a situation that's part of our upper watershed. The Sausal Creek watershed begins really right here. So I'd like to go over the concept of watershed. So here we are here at the ridge line, and that would be where my 2 hands meet. And if a drop of water falls here and rolls to the east, it will flow down these cracks in my hands, and the water will then flow out into the San Leandro watershed and out San Leandro Creek. If the water flows to the west, it will flow down the Palo Seco Creek and join the Shepherd Canyon Creek and meet at the golf course below Highway 13 and unite to form the Sausal Creek watershed, which will come out by Fruitvale Bridge. And that is an earlier live stream event that we saw. So this is the watershed breaking. And if it goes this way, it's going to go east. If it's going to go this way, it's going to go west. And interestingly, if it goes to the east in San Leandro, it will pop out in San Francisco Bay, San Leandro Bay, 3 watersheds south of here. So that's the amazing thing, is that Oakland is divided into about 11 watersheds that can constrain the water and drive it through the land, enhancing the people that live there, the ecology, and the aquatic resources that we have. So we're at this juncture where we are up in the upper watershed, where we have a wildland urban interface. And that is going to be part of the discussion that we are going to have. One of the mottos of the Chabot Space and Science Center is your place in the universe. Well, here we are really getting down to our place in Oakland, our place on the watershed. And interestingly, this is a live stream event, and our information is coming into your computer, your house. It's a great analogy to what a stream is actually doing. A stream is constraining information, if you will, biological diversity and genetic diversity, and constraining it to one area and directing it forcefully in an avenue, just much like this information is coming into your homes. So we're going to be talking specifically about the Pallid Manzanita, the most endangered plant in the Sausal Creek watershed throughout our talk today. Endangered and federally threatened species. And when we began working here at Chabot, trying to get Chabot and the city of Oakland to manage, there were 21 individuals of this plant. And by the time we finally got rolling, I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat through trying to get action on the Pallid Manzanita. But when we finally did get going in 2013, we were only down to 3 adult mature plants. And so the reason for that is because the canopy of the forest had overgrown so much through the fog drip that we had to begin removing trees. And that is a rather difficult and expensive proposition. So I'm going to move down into my position, and I'm going to pass this back to Elizabeth.
Okay, I'm on somebody else's phone now because my phone is not cooperating. What's amazing about what's happening here, I've been reading all about the Pallid Manzanita restoration, how things to get to this point. I saw a great sign in a watershed in Idaho that explained all the things that they had been doing for the last 30 or 40 years and how each of the steps they took was incorrect. And so they then said, so here's what we figured out to do now, but we're not sure this is going to work either. And I really appreciated that. At this point, we're in such an experimental stage. We had Lech Naumovich for a live stream that we did in Point Malati. Lex worked a lot here in the East Bay, and in fact, he's worked on the Pallids. And he is one of the people that's helping reset the standards for behavior, and really appreciate that. So I just want to demonstrate what Mark was talking about before, how the water goes in different directions. So you can see here we are up at Chabot, and he's ridge. It's going down into the San Leandro watershed, which is actually the creek that feeds the Oakland estuary. It's so fascinating. So it's coming down this side and then wrapping all the way around. It's amazing. And I believe that's right. And then you can see the arrow that's also headed down into the where Sausal Creek runs, and the arrow coming from the other headwaters, or one of the other, there's actually 4 headwaters for to come up here and start seeing where the water's coming out of the ground. So I think we're going to trade back to Mark now.
I think we're going to switch to Wendy.
Wendy, okay, cool. So Mark, are we going to Wendy now? Yes. All right. Cool. We're really lucky to have Wendy Tokuda with us to talk about restoration up in this area.
Hey, Elizabeth, thank you. So the first thing I want to say is what a lot of people don't realize is just how beautiful it is up here in the hills and how lucky we are to have this extraordinary setting. People don't realize that here in the city of Oakland, the city we think of as being so urban, there are these beautiful parks. They're really treasures, large open spaces that are preserves of a lot of the native plants and trees that have been here for a very long time. And we all think, or a lot of people think, that these open spaces just sort of take care of themselves. And the truth is they do not at all take care of themselves, and have become overgrown in a way that is harmful to not just the natural environment, but they have created a fire hazard as well. So I have some slides to show this restoration project that we began about, it's a quarter of a mile from where I'm standing right now at Chabot to the south. And it's an area surrounding the Police Activities League camp, or we call it PAL camp. And here's one of the work parties you can see that has filled these bags with a lot of the overgrowth that needs to be regularly removed. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you how it all started. I work with the East Bay Regional Parks with a broom pulling group. And we were on our way into Redwood Regional Park when we passed by a stand of broom, which you can kind of see in here, and a lot of dead growth as well. And we went, well, we should just pull this broom rather than going deep into the park. We should get rid of this stuff. So we started pulling the broom there. And the next slide, I'll show you what we found in this area. This is what it looked like. And this will help you understand the kind of fire hazards that we're dealing with. It wasn't just live broom, it was dead broom that was standing. Someone was asking, is this Scotch broom? There was a mix here of French broom and Scotch broom. They're 2 different species, but they are they're closely related and similar in the way they grow. And we looked at this dead broom and went, we got a major problem up here in the hills, very close to where people live. These mega fires that have been happening in California, what you are looking at here, is one of the things that fuels those mega fires. It's the overgrowth that we have allowed to happen in the wildlands. And the combination of this and drought and climate change have contributed to these huge, intense fires that we now have. So we started to pull this stuff out, go to the next slide, and we realized it was going to take regular work parties to really make a dent in the amount of brush that was here. So we started having regular work parties. Next slide. And this is some of the broom in this 5-acre open space where we were working. We started to discover the amount of overgrowth of French broom that was in there. Next slide. So I began to work with the city of Oakland. I formally adopted the spot, which gave me jurisdiction. It gave me the ability to work with the city of Oakland to get tools in there, and to get some support to have regular work parties to begin to really make a dent in this 5-acre open space. And so the city of Oakland not just gave me tools, next slide, but that first year, we worked with Oakland Works during the summer and had teenagers in the city of Oakland work for 2 weeks pulling broom in this area. And here's one of the work groups. It was one of our volunteers leading it, Carol Beck. And you can see the broom in the background. And the next slide will show you another work party and the amount, see the broom standing in back of them. I mean, the place was ridden with French broom, this overgrowth that was crowding out any native plants that were growing there and creating this fire hazard. Next slide. And then what I realized was even that wasn't enough to really deal with the problem in this 5-acre space. So we had one big honking work party where we brought in, I think it was 3 large waste bins, 20 cubic yards, 30 cubic yards, and brought in a lot of volunteers on one day to try to make an impact. And here they are all signing in, and go to the next page. And the protocol, because there are 2 Pallid Manzanitas in this 5-acre spot, because it is very close to this area that Mark was talking about. This is Pallid Manzanita habitat. We had everybody disinfect their shoes to get rid of any of the pathogen spores that might affect those pallids. Everybody, this is part of the protocol of working in this area, is stepping into it's alcohol, not the kind we drink, but rubbing alcohol. Anyway, go to the next slide. And we were working not just on pulling broom, but limbing up, cutting off the lower branches of trees, hauling out a lot of the dead wood that was in that area, and filling 3 dumpsters on that one day. And the next slide will show you the size of this work party that it took to fill those. And you see one of the dumpsters there on the left-hand side. And that was a great day, but there was still work to be done. And an area, 5-acre size of an area of 5 acres takes a lot of maintenance work. So next slide, I decided we were going to have more work parties on a regular basis to really maintain the area. And we began to pay attention to the thick overgrowth of a lot of very spindly Monterey pines that had invaded the area. And so these work parties, we were working with the missionaries, LDS missionaries from the Mormon temple, which is close by. And they volunteered to come in on a quarterly basis and begin to help thin out and limb up some of this overgrowth. Next slide will show you the kind of stuff we were hauling out and filling, again, dumpsters full of the stuff to haul it out. Next slide. You'll see they work. These guys were great. They were wonderful volunteers. And we were able to thin out a lot of the overgrowth. Next slide. But during this process, I think the forest was educating me on the amount of work that needed to be done because this area had not been maintained at all because of the lack of funds for years. And in some places, probably it felt like never. So I began to apply for grants to try to take down some of the larger Monterey pines that were invading the forest and overcrowding it. And next slide. So we were able to get grants from the Diablo Fire Safe Council and the Oakland Wildfire Prevention Assessment District, which has since dissolved. But these grants were $5,000 a piece. Over the years, I've been able to get about 6 or 7 of them. And the next slides are going to show you what we were able to do with these work crews that came in because they had the equipment to cut down some of these Monterey pines that were crowding the forest. And as Beth Keir is mentioning here, these pines were planted here in this area. Now, this is what it looked like before. And go to the next slide. And this is what it looked like after. Okay, so this area really wanted to be a meadow, but was being invaded by these spindly Monterey pines. The next slide. This is what it looked like before, and that's our arborist there. And the next slide will show you what it looked like after. So you can see how it opens up that meadow. And a nice byproduct of this is Pallid Manzanita habitat. Our great hope is that someday maybe the Pallid Manzanitas will come back as we open up the space. The next slide will show you another area. This was a campfire that had been built in an open space near the Police Activities League camp that was actually being used, and you can see how overgrown it was, and there were a lot of there's a lot of tree overgrowth around it, and it was a fire waiting to happen. It was actually kind of shocking that this little fire circle existed in this high fire area. So we got rid of it. And go to the next slide, and you will see the actual camp. These are the cabins that are here in the Police Activities League camp, and this large open space here overgrown with grass. And so what we did was got rid of that other old fire circle. Go to the next slide. And cleared it out. So if they did want to have a fire, it would be in a much safer open space. And we were continuing to work around that camp, removing some of the overgrowth. Next slide will show you an area before. This is another grant that we got. Go to the next slide, it will show you after. That's after. You can see how much more open it is. Next slide will show you one of the other areas we were working on. This is what it looked like before. This is what it looked like after. Next slide. These are some of the acacias that were growing next to the camp, leaning over onto the fence and onto one of them actually onto a building. Go to the next slide. That's what it looked like after. Now these acacias are cutting them is not enough. We had to really keep going after them and cutting down the regrowth from those trees, because we're not allowed to use herbicides in this area. So we have to go in and manually keep these trees from growing back. Go to the next slide. It shows you these acacias leaning over into the fence area. This is what it looked like after our work. Whoop, that's okay. Go to the next slide. This is what it looked like after we cut down those acacias. Next slide. We had to match these grants with manual labor. So what we did was we had regular work parties to limb up and haul out dead wood in part of this open space. And you can see the volunteers here at work. Next slide. Here's what we were dealing with. The young acacias are sprouting up in the middle of this by the thousands, okay? A lot of these can be pulled out with a weed wrench. What was happening in this area was, it was a hillside. Dead trees would fall. They would fall on top of each other, and it was creating a briar patch of trees, dead trees falling on top of each other, and then these acacias growing up through them. So it was a massive briar patch of fuel load. Next slide. Okay, you can see here, this is an oak tree. It's a very old oak tree, and you see the acacia trees falling right on top of it. You can kind of see in the background the briar patch that I'm referring to. So with one grant, we thought we had to get rid of these trees that are growing over on top of the oak and let that oak grow. Next slide will show you what it looked like after we cleared that area. And you can see the oak tree is now allowed to thrive. Next slide. This is what we were dealing with in this briar patch. Those trees that are leaning over like that, some of them are alive, some are dead, but they're all growing on top of each other. So we got a grant to remove these large trees, and then the volunteers are helping with their labor to do work in addition to that. See, this slide here shows before, the next slide shows after. There you go. That's what it looked like after, when we were able to open up that space. Next slide, please. Here's our work party, one of our work parties. And what they would do is, again, pull with weed wrenches, French broom, but also young acacia trees and some young Monterey pines that were growing up through the dead pines, so dead trees that were leaning over. Go to the next slide and you'll see a pile of some of the slag that these young volunteers were able to actually limb up and then haul down this hillside. And we actually had to use some of our grant money to get this hauled out. Show the next slide and you'll see what it looks like when we get rid of that slag. This is the open space after we got rid of that pile of fuel load. And the next slide will show you some of the volunteers, and what we were doing in addition to that was the flags show you where we are planting native plants to replace a lot of the weedy annual grasses that were growing in this meadow. We are transitioning to native grasses and forbs to replant and removing the weedy annual grasses and the thistles in this area to restore the meadows in this open space. The next slide. So here's what I've learned from this, okay? These invasives and this overgrowth need to be removed. And when the city doesn't have the money to do it, volunteers are key. And unfortunately, because of the amount of overgrowth, volunteers are the only people in some places that are able to do this work. And that's unfortunate to say that, but it is the truth. So to get volunteers and to keep them, because working here on a regular basis, in other words, not just volunteering, but really stewardship. It's a stewardship that is required here. We have to let the volunteers know how grateful we are that they are doing this public service. We feed them, we give them water. We tell them the first rule is don't get hurt. And that labor that we are able to provide, we can leverage to get grants from the Diablo Fire Safe Council. Last year, I got a $15,000 or $10,000 grant from the California Fire Foundation. And on city property, in order for a volunteer like me to get this work done, you have to sign up for the Adopt a Spot program. That gives you jurisdiction. That gave me the ability to work with the city. For each of these grants, I had to get approval from multiple departments with the city, including the fire department, the Department of Public Works, and the Tree Services Department, the Parks Department, stewardship. You have to show up here with representatives from those departments to have them examine the area, okay the work, because you can't just go in there and cut things down. And all of this has to be documented. I've had to keep records that show the number of hours the volunteers are putting in and the work that is being done, and document it with photos so that people can see the results of the work. And I've really had to learn to have realistic expectations, to know that there will be complications. Dumpsters will be placed in the wrong spots. It's not anybody's fault. Everyone's trying to do their job, but these things happen. And I've had to learn to work with the city in a cooperative way, in a way I've had to learn to work with people and to know that problems are going to come up and you just have to deal with it if you want to get this work done. So it's been an amazing learning experience. I'm very grateful for. I think we've been able to make a dent. And again, stewardship, not just volunteering, but I think that stewardship is the key. On the next slide, you'll see one of the meadows that we're working to restore. And back in this meadow is hidden a Pallid Manzanita. So go to the next slide and you'll see that Pallid Manzanita that we have roped off to try to make sure we can protect it, clear the area around it to allow it to thrive. There are 2 pallids on this site. And this is the perfect opportunity to take me back to Mark, who has really spearheaded with Friends of Sausal Creek, spearheaded effort to preserve these Pallid Manzanitas, which are endangered. They're really in trouble up here, is the truth of it, unless we can get a lot of work done. And Mark has been responsible for spearheading the work to protect these plants. So Mark, why don't you take it from here and tell everybody more about these pallids? Friends of Sausal Creek, by the way, the nonprofit that Mark works with and that I've been volunteering with is a fantastic organization and has projects throughout the watershed to restore these open spaces. And it has been able to harness an army of volunteers to clean up really the headwaters, the creeks.
Suddenly went into safe driving mode. And
okay, Mark, why don't you come up and use my camera?
okay, so sorry about that. This is this live stream stuff is really difficult here in the field. And I hope I'm coming through okay. So I'm out in the real edge of the Chabot area where the pallids are. And I want to thank Wendy for that setup, because really volunteers are the way this is going to work. We are citizen scientists and citizen volunteers. So I want to follow up with what Wendy said. I'm about to come into the pallids and I have biosanitized my boots and put booties on them, because as Wendy was saying with volunteers and how difficult it is, it's now become twice as difficult because of the introduction of spores from Phytophthora cinnamomi and Phytophthora, what's it called, Ramona, for sudden oak death. So it's not really easy for volunteers to access this place unless biosanitation is taking place. So I've done that, and now I'm about to enter into this area down a hill, going by some poison oak. So, okay, so I'm going to sort of give the idea of that Pallid Manzanitas thrive on adversity. They like very poor soils. They like fog drip. They like ridge tops. And they don't like shade of overgrown trees. So we identified initially 21 mature manzanitas here when we began, when Fosk is actually 25 years old. So when we finally got our act together in 1998, we found 21 adult Pallid Manzanitas. And we also found them in a deep forest of overgrown Monterey pine, eucalyptus, even oak and madrone, coyote bush. But that was not thriving. And this is one of the rarest plants in our watershed. It's a state endangered species. And so we inherited this issue and took full responsibility for it, because frankly, nobody else was and nobody else will. So if you look here, you can see the last of the giant adults. You can see the gray skeleton here of it, and its roots were up there, about 13 feet tall, a beautiful specimen here that just slowly went into senescence and decline. And if that's one thing the Friends have been able to do, is arrive on the scene as the mature original ecology has been dying. We saw that in Diamond Creek when we arrived. The alders were just dying. Now we're here and we're resurrecting these species. And so here's the adult. And in 2013 and 14, we also received grants. We had 3, and now we've just gotten our 4th grant from the Alameda County Fish and Wildlife Commission. These are small grants, enough to pay our staff and buy the equipment and come out here and weed and prepare the soil. And we're also obligated to monitor these plants because they're endangered species. So if you look closely here, this is, again, as I said, a maritime chaparral plant. And we are in what would be maritime chaparral. By maritime, it means it's influenced by coastal fog drip. And chaparral is a dry land ecosystem, a biome that's determined by soils, moisture, heat, and constituent plants, which include oak, poison oak. Here we have coffeeberry, soapberry down here. And this is where the pallid makes its last stand. And I should say that there's pallids also at Huckleberry Regional Preserve, preserved for them. There's another disjunct population at El Sobrante Ridge. And we have one here next to Chabot. And there's another one a little further right across from where Wendy is working, called Big Tree Site. But this was down to 3. By the time we got our first grants in 2013, we were down to the end. 1, by the time we started removing big trees, and here are, these are what we had to do. We had to cut down big Monterey pines, big eucalyptus trees. We had to remove the overstory so light could come in. And we started to do that in 2015. And so here we are in 2021. This area that you see here was all cleared. And so the sun now is just peeking through, and you can see here on the horizon, those spiky plants. These are the seeds of the adult trees that was in the seed bed. And all we really needed to do was to clear the overstory. And you see this tarping here. This is where a eucalyptus was. It's tarped so that the seed sprouts don't come up. What the plant really needs is open mineral soil and fog drip. And there are in a whole seed bank from the plants that were here for decades. All we needed to do was prepare the soil, get out of the way, and voila, here is a 3 to 5 year old manzanita coming up. Look at that beautiful new growth from this year's rain and fog drip. It looks really pretty. And so if you follow me along here, here's another one. And these are now have made it through the difficult early years. Here's 2 more up here. Oh, there's some lovely poison oak. Manzanita, manzanita, manzanita. These are the small guys that are now taking on the arched form. And some of them are flowering this year. So we are down now to approximately, not down, we're up to well over 100 of these large, now reproductively viable plants. So coming back here, because this is the how big they will get. So the point is, this was all done by volunteer work with small grants, and we pulled back from the edge one of the most characteristic plants in Oakland, the Pallid Manzanita. That's a whole interesting discussion. Manzanitas have speciated radically. I can't tell you exactly how many there are, but there's hundreds of them all over California. And it's almost like every ridgetop has its own individual species. There's the San Brunos, there's the, well, I won't even go into it just to show how ignorant I am, but we've focused so much energy, and it's so gratifying to see there's some babies over there. Here's some coming up here. I'm looking over there. Why? I don't come out here very often because I don't want to risk introducing any Phytophthora, but I am just blown away by how many we have here. Again, this is unfortunately, a project that requires commitment for the rest of the future. We just can't say, okay, we've made a dent and walk away, because this will be overgrown by these young oaks. Here's some young oaks here. And it's always a tragedy to have to cut an oak tree down, but this little oak tree, that will be, 10 times higher in a few years. So we require a full-time commitment to saving what we can save. Now, I always like to acknowledge the native Californians. We are the new native Californians. It's our responsibility to manage, to prevent fire, and to manage what we can with what we have to do. And I think that's really the hallmark of what the Friends of Sausal Creek have been able to do over the last 25 years. I think that's really all I need to say about this. We've succeeded, and now we're pleased to share this with you. So I'm going to kick this back. Can you confirm that you can see and take this from here, Elizabeth? Well, I would also just like to acknowledge that we have received our 4th grant from the Fish and Wildlife Commission to monitor other plants, to monitor and map other rare plants in the watershed. So,
All right.
Okay, I think I hear Elizabeth.
Here I am again on somebody else's phone. Let's turn this off. And so all of these points that I want to remake, and that is that to do restoration, anybody who's doing restoration knows it's really hard to get funding to do it for all the things that are environmental. And then once you add education, there's almost no funding to educate people. And without being able to educate people, then we recreate the same problems. One of the big issues for creeks and erosion, or for creeks in general, and that's really crucial for rivers and for floodplains and for the ecosystem. So of course, here in the East Bay, creeks are built up right up to the edges often, or they're buried. And so the upper watershed is this kind of miraculous place where the creeks are still open, and we have to do the hard work of restoring them to a place where there's a healthy ecosystem for the ecosystem residents that go far beyond the human. A lot of humans are doing, and as well, that this is for the ecosystem. We need functioning ecosystems for us to function. We have this, it's really interesting living in an urban area, because we think of ourselves as outside of an ecosystem. Like we have to go out to nature, we have to come up to the hills, whereas nature is all around us all the time. Our homes are smack in the middle of watersheds. And it's really important to remember that when you're doing your own landscaping, is to think of your up or anywhere along the creek, really thinking about what does the creek need? What do the creek, I just wanted to say that, and to encourage everybody to donate. I think somewhere I have, well, in the follow-up letter for sure, we'll give you links to Friends of Sausal Creek, to Greenbelt Alliance, and to Wholly H2O. And you can see, and then it's so important really to come out. And one of the things I read this morning in their Pallid Manzanita report from Friends of Sausal Creek was that it's really hard for them to get a solid pod of interns over time, so that each time they're having to reteach what to do. It's great that so many people are coming to get taught, but it's also really important to commit to a project. Like I'm just committing to a project to clean out owl and bird boxes in the EB Mud Water District. And so it's just great to commit to a particular project, get to know your watershed. There's so many opportunities available to get yourself out there, get to know it. And when I've done volunteering for Friends of Sausal Creek, I've done a little bit of this clearing, and it's really a blast. It's really super fun to get in there and, you know, curse at the vines and get them out of there and feel like at the end of 2 hours, wow, I did something significant to contribute to this watershed. So I just want to thank our partners. I want to thank Mark and Wendy for coming out here today and for being such great contributors to the watershed and for helping us map this. These live streams are part of a bigger program called Walking Waterhoods. Waterhoods is a watershed neighborhood. And we are having online tours. We're just adding 300 points of interest along Sausal Creek right now up into Pockets Creek. So there'll be a Sausal Creek tour by the fall. And we're really excited. These live streams will be part of that. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And it's also great in the chat how you guys added so much great information, and we published the chats too. Okay. So you'll get a follow-up email with more info and the many thanks for caring enough to participate and learn more. Thanks a lot for coming today, everybody.
All right. Thank you. And thanks, Elizabeth, for all of your work on this. And thanks to Mark and Wendy and everybody else who came together to make this happen. We'll see you all at the next one.
Thanks, so.